My name's Bella May. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about hemming circle cut skirts. I recently published an ebook where I show 6 ways to hem circle cut skirts. In the past several years, it seems like every costume I made came with circle cut skirts, whether it was based on the design of the original dress or just out of preference because I like the way they look. I mean, when you get a nice slim waist with a full skirt, that's the best of both worlds for a lot of costumes. In general, a circle cut skirt is just fabulous. The look is really nice and I tended to use a lot of them. But not only just one circle skirt for a costume, I tended to use several circle skirts in one costume. For example, my Belle 2017 replica that I made, in total that whole petticoat had 12 full circle skirts. And we're talking very large circles. And with each layer, the skirt got larger, and so there was a larger circumference, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So, without getting too much into the math and confusing you, which I might have already, I had to hem about 100 yards of circle cut hems. That was a lot, and with the first one, I came up with this technique that I saw online, and it worked and it looked good. But when I made the second one for a customer, I decided to explore some different techniques to find a way that worked better and quicker. Because when you're trying to hem 12 large circle skirts that equal 100 yards of hem, you kind of gotta find something that's fast but also looks good. So you will find that technique in my ebook, which I've linked down below. I also explore different variations you can do for a hem based on your fabric. I talk about what you can do with crisp, sheer fabrics such as silk organza, and that technique in particular is the one I use for the Belle dress. I also explore how you can hem a fabric like chiffon. Chiffon is a lovely fabric, but when you add a circle skirt to that equation, things get a little bit tricky. So I talk about all that in the ebook and a couple other techniques. My favorite is called the fast technique, and it really is a very fast technique. It's even faster than the one I used for the Belle dress, but for the Belle dress, I didn't want the look. Anyways, if that intrigued you enough, you can go down to the link below and order my ebook. It's $7 and it's about 50 pages, and it has 6 different techniques that you can use to hem circle cut skirts. So the first technique in the ebook is the one I'm going to show here today on YouTube for free. So you can get a little taste of one of the techniques in that ebook. Let's move on to a little bit about why circle skirts might be a problem or why they're tricky to work with. If you clicked on this video, you probably know why it's tricky, or you at least know it's tricky. And I just wanted to go a little bit into the reason behind circle cut skirts and their trickiness. As you probably know, with circles, there's something called a diameter. And a diameter is the distance across the circle. So from one edge to the other edge, and that line intersects the middle of the circle. So that's the diameter. And the circumference is the distance around the full circle. And the way that you calculate a circumference is by timesing the diameter times pi. So pi equals 3.14. Don't ask me where that number came from, I have no idea. All I know is that when you times pi by the diameter, you get the circumference measurement. So I know that's math. I don't prefer math, but in the case of circle skirts, it does come in handy. When you cut out a circle skirt and such, you want to work with the circumference and diameter. So the trickiness of the hem of a circle skirt comes into play when you think about the diameter and how it relates to the circumference. The smaller the diameter, the smaller the circumference. Remember that. So when you're turning a hem over, and say you have a 1/2 inch hem, you turn it over, the raw edge is now larger than the place that you're trying to sew it on, if that makes sense. So you've taken up some of the diameter, which means you're working with a smaller circumference than the raw edge. That's kind of hard to explain, but I think you know what I'm talking about. So you turn that over, you now have this extra bit of fabric along the raw edge of the fold. And now if you go to say, do a standard hem and fold it another 1/2 inch, we're talking a very excessive amount of fabric in that hem. And that all that extra fabric has to fit in a smaller circumference because you're taking away that seam allowance of the hem, which is making diameter shorter, smaller, and that means the hem is a smaller circumference than the seam allowance. I'm gonna leave it at that before I confuse you more. That is the best way I can think of to explain it. Hopefully by visualizing that, you kind of see what I'm talking about. So a basic trick for circle skirts is to make a smaller hem. So we're talking 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch hems. You don't want any large hems. For this technique, I use a 1/4 inch hem. So that means you need a 1/2 inch of seam allowance, a 1/4 and then a 1/4 is a 1/2 inch of seam allowance. And what we're gonna do is we're using a lot of steam and heat to basically shrink that extra fabric into the hem. And that probably sounded kind of weird, but that's basically what you're doing. Before we jump into learning that technique, I do want to mention that this technique works best with cotton fabrics. And the reason for that is most fabrics can't withstand the steam and heat. Even though I say cottons, that's in general, not all cottons will withstand it. I would recommend testing your fabric and seeing how it withstands to heat and steam, because that is the trick for this technique. You're basically using a lot of steam and heat to shrink that extra circumference into the hem and make a smooth hem. As we get further into the technique, you'll see what I'm talking about. So this is for cotton fabrics, but don't leave. If you happen to have a fabric that isn't cotton, go to this link below and order my ebook, because I show many ways to hem a circle cut skirt and many of them aren't for cotton. So if you need that information, it's all in the ebook. For the rest of you who have a cotton skirt to hem or would just like to learn my technique, let's continue on to learning this technique. So the tools you will need are, first of all, your circle cut skirt, of course, and then paper scissors, a writing instrument, anything will do, pen, pencil, marker. And then you will need a piece of cardstock, and then you'll want a spray bottle for the ironing process. This just helps add some extra steam to the whole process and just helps out in general. And then, of course, you will need an iron. I personally love my gravity feed iron for this process. It makes it much easier because you basically get instant steam, and I just love it for this technique especially, but any iron that does steam will work fine. So don't worry, you don't have to have one of these to do this. Now that we've talked about supplies, let's go on to actually doing the hem. So first of all, you're gonna make a template of the curve of your hem. Now, I will mention there are some preset templates out there that they just have a nice curve, and you can use those for this technique. I personally didn't have one of those, and I didn't see the need to buy one. I just make one out of this cardstock. So the first step is to place your piece of cardstock underneath the hem of your circle skirt. So just place it around there, just so you get a nice idea of what the curve of your hem looks like. And so I'm just gonna use my pen and trace here. This is a step that you don't have to be incredibly precise, because you basically just work around the hem and your template. You'll see a little bit more about that when we get onto it. We're now gonna cut not along the edge. We're going to cut a 1/4 inch in from the edge. And the reason for this edge is gonna be the folding point of your hem. So you have your traced hem, this is your raw edge, and you're gonna cut a 1/4 inch in from there. So this is now my template for my first fold. So here you can see that I now can place this along the hem, and I can fold the first 1/4 inch of the hem up like this. Here you can see that extra circumference punching up. And basically what we're gonna do is shrink that extra fabric to match this smaller circumference. I'm ironing in a perpendicular to the hem motion. So this is what I call perpendicular to the edge, and it's not a parallel motion like this. This would kind of just push the extra fabric every which way, and it wouldn't force the fabric to shrink into the smaller circumference. So with this motion, it's pushing the fibers this way, which is helping them all kind of shrink into that area. So as you can see, I've hardly used any steam, and I've just used the heat, and you can already see that the extra fabric there has been shrunk down. I do sometimes remove the template and then go with my iron to make sure that edge is creased nicely. So we're basically just gonna continue doing that around the edge of the circle skirt. So I mentioned this a little earlier, that sometimes you can buy a template that's preset in its curve and such. And if you're working with one of those, or if your template's just a little off based on your hem, you can just basically move it and adjust it to where a section of the curve matches. So with this area right now, here you can see it doesn't quite line up. There's less than a 1/4 inch here. So what I would do is iron this section first, then move my template slightly so that there's a 1/4 inch here, and now I can iron this section. So basically you just kind of work with your template so that a section of it at a time is aligned. So I've gone all the way around, but before we go on, I adjust my template just to make it easier. I could use the same template and just adjust it like I just talked about, but I find it easier to just trim away another 1/4 inch. And this is to account for the second fold. So now I can put my template here, and I can do my second 1/4 inch fold. And so again, we have the same circumference issue with this next 1/4 inch, and we're gonna do the same thing as what we just did. We're gonna shrink this edge into this circumference. Again, use a perpendicular motion. I do find on the second fold, you need to use more steam and heat to get it shrunk in place. This is also the time that I bring in my spray bottle. After I've done a section, I get it slightly damp, and then I use the iron again and more steam to really set that in place. There you can see a very nice flat hem there. There's no gaping extra fabric along this hem because we've shrunk it into place. So once we've done a section, we can continue moving around. And that is basically it for the whole pressing side. Of course, you're gonna go all the way around, but you could put pins here to keep it in place for when you sew. I personally just let it cool enough on my ironing board before I move it that it stays in place. Since it's a cotton fabric and this is just a muslin, it holds the crease really well, and so I don't use pins. Once that second fold has been pressed, it's now ready to sew. Here I've gone all the way around the hem, and as you can see, there's no extra fabric bunching up. This means that you did it correctly. I didn't sneak in any tucks or anything like that. I just sewed and I made sure that the edge wasn't stretching at all. And there you have it. Once you've sewn all the way around, your hem is now complete and you have a perfect circle hem. I do think the main trick for this technique is the pressing, making sure that it's pressed well, and once you start using this technique, you'll get a feel and start understanding a bit more of what I'm talking about. It could be a little bit complicated and kind of weird at first, so I would recommend after watching this video, get some test fabric and just play around with pressing that 1/4 inch over onto itself on a curved edge, and I think you'll get a feel for what you're trying to do. So I would recommend doing some practice before going on to your real fabric. The skirts you see behind me is a project I'm working on. The red and the black skirt are both circle skirts, and I've used one of the hemming techniques that I share in the ebook. I didn't particularly use this one because it is not cotton fabric and it wouldn't withstand the heat very well, and it wouldn't shrink into place as well as cotton does. So I used a different method for those, which you can find in the ebook linked down below. Circle skirts are really just fun to add to your wardrobe or your costumes or really just anything. But with it does arise the hem issue. I hope by watching this video and reading my ebook, you'll be able to tackle any circle cut hem, no matter what fabric it's made of, and you'll be able to achieve a perfect hem. And if there's a certain fabric that you don't know what to do with, or just none of the techniques are really working, I would highly recommend combining some of the techniques. Find little things that work for your fabric in the different techniques that I share and combine them and create your own unique technique. And along the way, you may discover your own perfect hem. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a new way to hem a circle skirt. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave a comment down below. Give this video a thumbs up, and also be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel where I will be having lots of videos coming your way in the coming year. Now go out into your own sewing area, learn, create, and inspire.